Moving forward to slide number 11, again, before we touch on the technical side, I'd like to highlight where do I get my information from, or what are good areas to find compound-specific information. So, first and foremost, recurve technique is awfully close to compound. It is an Asian strength. Focus on the areas of difference with compound and you can quickly have a great result with a developing compound athlete. My personal suggestions for resources on coaching are nice and simple. The World Archery Level 1 and Level 2 coaching course manuals and the courses themselves, fantastic. They have a lot of information around the recurve technique that you can adapt to compound very, very quickly. For compound specific information, my number one suggestion is a book by Clint Freeman, the former world record holder, world champion, and an Australian compound superstar, is Compound Archery My Way. Very simple book that explains areas of importance in compound archery. Very good read. Have a look if you can. Other areas would be World Archer's Coach Manual in Level 2. It has content on compound. It's quite a bit older, but quite helpful as well. It's pages 55 to 75. Finally, there is a range of information out there for compound. You'll see it on YouTube channels. You'll see it on online forums. Please be mindful of what you look at. Ones that I really enjoy, especially on a YouTube format, would be George Riles' Thing a Week, rather aptly named because it's never a thing a week, but the content is fantastic. Other ones you'll find is Knock On. So John Dudley has a range of very interesting things, even though typically they're more hunting focused. Same with Chris B, Levi Morgan, and even Paige Pierce's latest YouTube channel. Very beneficial, very clear around setting up your bows and how to. Now, technique, or the technical side of compound archery. One of the main things that I'll look at firstly is the overall body position at full draw of an archer. During the draw process and at full draw, it should be almost identical to a recurve athlete. So that is the head should sit still and the shoulders should be aligned with their hips wherever possible. Now, you can see the images that I've used here. These are literally the same images from the World Archery Coaching courses. You can see the recurve archer with the head over the shoulders, and you can see the compound archers as well, this exact same positioning. The more movement you have, whilst you can do that with a compound bow, I think the more movement you have within the draw and at full draw, the more strain you'll have on your body, and the less likely you are of having that consistent in time. Keeping it straight and still means a higher likelihood you'll keep it straight and still throughout the entire shot sequence. How do you coach that? It's very simple. Same as you would with a recurve bow. Coach controls either with their hands or with some arrows to keep them still. You can use mirrors where possible. For a compound, this will be heavily connected with your draw length. Get it too long, get it too short, and you'll find your body adjusting to that. So make sure you're really looking at the draw length portion as well. So moving on to more of the technical information. Slide 13 talks about shoulder alignment for a compound bow. And here's where the recurve side and the compound side differ slightly. You can see on the bottom left-hand side that there is some animations from a World Archery Coaching course. And you will see on the left, someone with their shoulders more open, and on the right, someone with their shoulders more aligned. Typically, the archer on the right of that animation is what you're looking for with a recurve. Now, with a compound, you can still align yourself that way, but atypically you will find them being either in line with the arrow or, like on the image on the left, slightly out of that line. In most cases, you would like to see the archer being more, or compound archer, being more in line like the recurve archer. But there are some issues that come with that. You can see in the two images that I posted of archers drawing their bow back, that actually their two shoulder points, either for the young woman, line up with the arrow, or for the young man, slightly are angled like the animation in the lower left corner. All of these images for a compound would be acceptable, and you do not have to force one of these onto a compound archer. This is the area of difference for the compound to recurve. And typically, again, will be around the compound draw length and how you set that bow shoulder as they're drawing and at anchor position. You can teach this the exact same way you would a recurve bow, but be mindful of the ability to vary that shoulder or these shoulder positions when they're at full draw. For slide 14, what I've done here is add a video of an archer drawing back their bow. Now, this is an archer from New Zealand, and before I even press play, what I want to highlight here is the fact that his drawing shoulder, the one that's pulling back the bow, it is much higher and out of its socket than a recurve bow might be. Now, that's purely because the brace height of that compound bow is quite short, in that all of the power is at that very first area. So the compound bow has its up to 60 pounds early on, and as it pulls back, it'll get lighter. The archer is forced to move that shoulder up. This is one of the main differences between the recurve draw and the compound draw. Now, as I push play on this athlete, what you will see is that despite that extra poundage at the beginning of his draw, he has kept his shoulders and hips very still. I have the video so it cycles backwards and forwards. His head remains very, very still. One of the things I will point out there is that his head will move slightly forward towards his string. This is not something that I typically endorse, but as it's a compound, it's not the end of the world. The archer might want to look at their overall draw length at some stage. But the main thing that I want you to look at is their head position and their shoulders and hips remaining very still during that draw process. And of course, the fact that that shoulder has to come forward more as they begin that draw. Now, this is an archer with a consistent body during draw. If we move on to slide number 15, this is an archer that is inconsistent with their body. Now, this is an extreme video. This is a young man that is either overbowed or is just not sure of controlling himself. But what you will see when I push the play button is that the archer's head and shoulders will move dramatically as they pull. One of the things that you should be looking for, obviously, is the danger and safety around compound archery. Please be mindful of sky drawing, but please be mindful of overbowing. That is, with younger athletes and developing athletes, not giving them too much poundage. One of the main determining factors around how heavy should you set that draw, that poundage, is if they can keep their body and head still. So as I push play on this video, you will note that the young man will put his head into his corner and really move his head like this. Obviously, this is hard to replicate. This is something that will bring in variety, and that will not be good for his development. So it's pretty simple to see the difference between the two. The young man did change his shot sequence dramatically and is now shooting excellently. But this is just to highlight the differences with the two bows and the similarities that they have with the recurve bow as well. Now, moving on to slide number 16 around technique or technical, it's the draw length. We've already mentioned it already with some of the other slides around how to hold your body. The draw length can be a very large Asian issue. It is probably the most critical selection for when you choose a bow and when you get the athlete to pull back. For me, A poor choice can really, make the body move and increase forces on the body, especially on, say, the bowl shoulder, their lower back, and that can be dangerous. It may also reduce the ability to aim and execute well. So be very, very careful when it comes to selecting your draw length. Now, I have 3-step method to selecting a draw length. So others have their own methods. This is the way that I will look at first and foremost any athlete when I'm suggesting their draw length. And they would be the body position of the athlete, the D-loop in the center of their eye, and then their draw elbow in line with the arrow. This is the most critical one. For me, some of the tips that you might want to have make sure you watch the athletes from multiple angles, not just in front, but to the side, so then you can catch if their body is moving, and then from behind as well. This way, you can really see what the athlete is doing. One of my favorite angles also is from above. So seeing that archer from above is very, very helpful. Other tips around this can be a lot of variety can come in with how they hold their release aids, so how deep, whether that's in or deep in a hand fist or really relaxed out, can change their draw length. The length of their D-loop can also change that as well, and the brand of their release aid can also change that length. The body moving will create drastic changes elsewhere, so make sure you try and get the positioning of their body first before you worry about the D-loop in the center of their eye and that draw elbow. The peep height, so where the peep is on the string, can also have a big factor here. Peep height too low, and you'll often find the archers digging their head down. Peep too high, and you'll find them with their anchor off of their face and struggling to have consistency as well. So for me, these are the 3 areas that I think you should be looking at, and the images on this slide really showcase this. So on the left, you'll see the same archer in 2 different images. This is about after 5 to 10 minutes work with that athlete who's now on their national team and won the bronze medal in the mixed pair, I think, at the World Championships. And you can see that green line, how it bends in the top and is straight in the bottom. Now, you can shoot with that bend. There are many athletes that have shown that, but in determining their draw length, whether you think it's appropriate, it's best if that athlete is straight. And you'll see the archers on the right-hand side. These are both national team members from 2017 and 2018 from Chinese Taipei, that their torso, their head, their hips are very straight and in line. This meant that determining their draw length was a lot easier than, say, the gentleman on the left-hand side who has slight curve in there as well. So, moving on to slide number 17, you should see 3 images around the second area, which is the D-loop to the center of their eye. Now, it's an approximate, and I prefer the center of the D-loop to go right to the center of the eye, and then from the eye to the peep to create a perfect angle, perfect square angle like this. But what you can see here is on the left image, the lower left image is one of our national team members with pretty good positioning of their eye to peep and a D-loop. And on the right-hand side, one of our near national members in Chinese Taipei, the first and the above image is him early before I met him, with his D-loop quite far back. Now, obviously this will create a raft of issues. One of them being contact of his drawing string on his face. You'll also note his fletchers have to be moved quite far forward on the arrow so it doesn't actually hit and hurt his face. The lower image is just a few days later after him and his coach have changed that position. It's still slightly behind his eye, but it is much closer than before. This is an area you really want to make sure you don't have them too far off behind their eye. So, finally, on slide number 18, we look at the 3rd step of draw length checking, which would be, I think, the most critical for compound draw length, which is that drawing elbow in line with the arrow. So it's connected with your body position. If you are leaning yourself one way or having yourself twisted, this can greatly affect that line. But what you will see in all three of those images is a relatively straight arrow line through the center of their drawing elbow at full draw. Now, typically, draw length from a recurve position to a compound is similar, but in the compound world, if you were going from a recurve to a compound, I typically see archers decreasing their draw length from about 1/2 inch to almost as much as 1.5 inches. So be mindful of that if you are converting a archer from a recurve to a compound. Typically, you'll drop their draw length an inch or so. In general, I see too many Asian archers having too long of a draw length than too short of a draw length. And it's something that, from the Chinese Taipei perspective, I often reduced their draw length rather than increase their draw length. So for me, be mindful of their body position first. And here you can see 3 archers with great straight positioning. Probably the woman in the middle, the image in the middle, would be the most straight, with also that shoulder alignment that we talked about earlier. Here in slide 19, you can see some examples of differing alignments, so that elbow alignment. So in the first image on the left, you will see that the gentleman has his elbow just slightly out of that line in terms of inside that line. Now, it's not a terrible position to be in. It depends on how he's activating the release, how he's weighted his stabilizers and is comfortable with holding that position, and perhaps even his holding weight and the aggressive nature of his cam. In the second image, image number 2, what you'll find is, again, that elbow is slightly behind. This is an international level, top 10 woman actually in the world, and it is acceptable as long as it's consistent. You need to be careful about some other areas, which is the posture of their body and how much contact they might have on that face. But again, it relies on their draw length, it relies on their stabilizer setup and how they're activating the release. This can be acceptable. In images number 3 and 4, what you're going to find is more extreme versions of that elbow alignment. I think number 3, you can see that the back has a big arc in there, as well as that elbow is very high and inside. This one is more dangerous than the other 2. This one is quite extreme, and there needs to be some work first on the young man's position on his body, and then the draw length and how he holds that release aid. But it goes to show you some of the variances that you will see. In image number 4, you will see the elbow outside of that arrow line. And it is somewhat common amongst some of our high-level athletes worldwide, but you would prefer it to line up with that arrow as much as possible. You'll also note that with his elbow going out of the line, that his shoulders also will be much more open to the target. So when he's shooting with his hand out this way, he's going to be quite turned and open as well. This can cause more stress and force over the front shoulder and needs to be monitored carefully. The young man in number 4 is a high school level athlete, and if you get onto this case early, it can be very beneficial for their development. Leave it too long and it can be very hard for you to actually fix or feel comfortable with them, them feel comfortable with you making that change. So please be mindful of that. In slides number 20, or in slide number 20, I'm going to show you actually the archer that we put right up in the very first question, the big question about how to develop. This archer was a national team member. They have been to the Asian Games, very, very strong shooting. And this video is one of the first I ever took of him whilst shooting. And I want you to look at the video when I push play around his draw length in particular. So is it too long? Is it too short? And what do you feel about that? One of the things you should look at is when that stops, where is that hand compared to his eye? It is quite far back. You'll also notice that the head is moving forward and really moving forward quite aggressively into the string as he reaches anchor. This is a very easy one for me to describe around being too long. The D loop is quite behind his eye. You see his head moving. Even if he kept his head still, it would be behind. And that string is dug in quite firmly. His body is quite straight. Very, very good positioning. But if you look at the archer from behind and above, you'd note that that elbow was quite around. Now, moving to slide 21, you can see this archer just the following day has had some changes both in his draw length. I think it was about an inch or so shorter, and we changed how his stabilizers were weighted as well. And here you can see, as I push play, that his head and his elbow his peep is closer to his eye, his head is moving less, and this draw length is much better for this athlete. This positioning would actually go on to win him, help win him, I should say, not be the only reason, but help win him that World Cup gold medal in Turkey. So, moving on, other technical areas. So in slide number 22, we look at two very important areas. That would be your grip and your anchor. These are extremely important in compound, mainly because we hold a very low holding weight. Now, most cams will let off, say, 60 to 75 or 80% let off in the target world. That means you're holding atypically from 20 pounds down to about 10, 12, for most males, and it can be less for women as well. That kind of holding weight, only holding 10 or 12 pounds or even 20 pounds, means the bow is very movable in rotation and in angle like this. Bearing your pressure in these points, especially as you're releasing, can cause extreme accuracy issues. Now, consistency in those positions is fine, and you can actually have very good results even with interesting positioning, but it can affect your arrow so greatly if you are not consistent. The tuning portion, very interesting to do with two different archers that have different grips and different anchors. If you get two archers with one bow, you can get two greatly different tunes out of that bow. So please take that into effect or thoughts when you are setting up an archer and you're trying to tune that bow. The position or pressure must be consistent. It must be relaxed, especially in that bow hand. And please be mindful of your side rod positioning. The more weight that you have on that lower area can cause a bit of a torque on the bow and can greatly change the tune, so be careful of that. The bow arm, so the radius bone itself, you must try and align it with the center of the grip. So I've got a bow here, and that knuckle angle, typical, the same as recurve, should be about 45 degrees. You must have relaxed digits or fingers in the end of the bow. Excessive strain, excessive stress can cause a lot of issue. And you can see in the image, the cartoon image, which is actually taken from World Archery's coaching manual, this is an image of a recurve bow. It's very similar in structure to the compound bow. This is why I think actually Asian compound archers have quite a benefit. They already have typically very good grip structures. And I think you'll see more variation amongst Western compound shooters than you will amongst Asian compound shooters. Here you'll see as well images in this slide, some pictures of an Australian man and his grip, and that radius bone is trying to line up with the center of his grip to stop any angular forces or torques turning or twisting that bow in your hand. Now, coaching this, the bow grip is no different than the recurve. The shape and the angle is typically different, typically thinner, typically lower, but the principles are exactly the same. So the sling that you might use or bow sling you might use typically is much shorter, but in essence, it should be somewhat the same as a recurve grip. One of the things that, as a coaching tip, I would look for is the follow through. So filming a grip of an archer is a beneficial thing to do as a coach, and the movement or the follow through will show the issues. If there's secondary grabs and ticks, it will very quickly show on that video. It should be natural, and they should maintain the tension and the direction or the position as that bow goes through. So, continuing on with the bow grip, slide 23 has a series of images of athletes' grip on their bow. On the left-hand side, you'll see the same individual for both images. You'll see in the bottom that radius side is trying to line up with the center of their grip. And above, you see that knuckle angle about 45 degrees. In the middle, you'll find Braden Galantine down the bottom, probably one of the best modern compound archers of our day, having a very good grip position. You'll notice his thumb towards the target. This is a good sign that his positioning is good, that he's relaxed. Above that image, what you will see is that archer curling their finger, but also changing the angle, which is increasing the tension on that bow. The potential of torquing that could be high. And on the right hand side, you'll actually see images of my hand while shooting. Whilst not perfect, I do have a pretty good position, mainly because I think I come from a recurve background, so it helps greatly. On slide 24, we have a look again at that release hand. So we've talked about the grip. How to coach it is very similar to the recurve, almost the same. It's just that angle that's slightly different. For the release hand, again, it is similar to recurve. Whilst we're holding the release aid in a different angle, you're actually looking for the same principle of getting this nice and straight as much as you can. And that's why I've added in the top right-hand corner that image of the World Archery Coaches Manual, where they're trying to show that nice straight line. All three of the other images you'll see of the compound archers, you will note that that nice straight line is there, but you will note that the angle of that is different. So the angle of the release aid that they're holding varies from rather flat with the individual in the top left up to rather vertical for both of the two bottom gentlemen. Now, the reason why you want that straight elbow or that straight elbow through the wrist is to reduce the tension where possible. So any type of, additional muscle engagement can cause obviously strain, but also inconsistencies in how you fire that release aid. So that's that typical punching that you might have heard of. It can come from that position. Now, in slide 24, I asked the question about an angle, which is what is the appropriate angle? My answer is very typical, which is just whatever you choose, keep it consistent. There are a lot of variety out there in terms of on the international scene, so I cannot say one is better than the other. I prefer, if you were looking at that as an angle, that you go at about 45 degrees, but it depends on their jaw structure, where they're anchored and how they fire. So for me, testing that out can be beneficial and may change the muscle group you use when activating your release aid. Another area that I wanted to touch on quickly was the timing of each shot. So with the compound versus the recurve, timing is still a very crucial area. A lot of people don't believe that in terms of they're not talking about it very much. But for me personally, it is crucial, especially if you want to play in the plus 700 category. So for the recurve archers, timing is crucial. From anchor to release, 2 to 3 seconds is normal. Now with the compound, it can be a little more. You can go as far as 10 seconds. I can't do that personally, but you may have an archer that's strong enough and capable. But the consistency of both anchor to release and then the next shot is vital. So please be mindful. You can use different rhythm apps and you can actually time these types of things and figure it out what is best for your archer or your team, because each person will differ greatly, but it is another area of importance. I want to quickly show you on slide 25 just some of the angle variances you can get. Now, all four of these arches in this image, you will see that there's quite a noticeable break in that wrist and how they're holding the release. And now each one of these arches can shoot to a very high level, and you may see this in some very high level international arches. This does not mean that it can't be effective. It just means that it may cause more stress, and especially for a young developing archer, this can be a very, very good area to develop that helps them move quickly to higher scores. So, we've talked about the grip itself. We've talked about how to hold that arm. We also talked about the anchor positioning being a very important area. So, for me, that anchor, that facial pressure with string perhaps, is the largest Asian issue that I think I see technically. Added pressure to the face can cause extreme accuracy differences. So, in windy conditions or longer time shots, big variances can occur. Asian archers like the string to touch their face, typically the nose. It's a recurve trait. It's not necessary. I think it comes from a varying series of issues, which could be the ATA of the bow, their face shape, how they hold their body, and their draw length as well can all play a factor in this position and where they want that to be. In terms of touching your nose, you do not have to go longer in your draw length to actually touch your nose. You can shoot a smaller axle-to-axle bow, but all you have to do is raise your hand up to touch your nose. It's not difficult. It does not have to touch your nose. The peep is your second reference point. So please be mindful, excess contact can be dramatic. Contact now is okay. So you can touch your face, and there are many archers that prove this. But what that contact must be is light and consistent, whether that's in wind, whether that's under pressure, it must stay the same. One of the things that I do like here is that Griv, or George Riles out of the USA, has a thing a week, which shows in a bow press or in a hooter shooter, a compound at full draw, and just how easy it is via that pressure to change where you're aiming. So please be very mindful. What you'll see here in all four of these images is that I think there is a lot of contact on their face. These archers, you can already see that Kim Jong-ho is already a world champion, very, very strong shooter, Asian champion. That contact can cause some issues, so I'm not saying that you have to stop contacting your face in any of these images, just that it can cause some issues. And typically it can be from longer draw length, but also because they want to touch their nose with the string. Not necessary. Now the anchor position, you'll see that most archers in this image are behind their jaw. What I suggest is quite simple, using your knuckles, the divot in them, against your jaw. And typically these guys are a bit further back, but having that consistent is the way to go. So we've been able to look at almost the entire shot sequence from the technique portion. We've looked at the body position, we've looked at the grip and the anchor position, how to hold the release aid. Now I'd like to look at release aids themselves and how to make them activate. So on slide 27, you can see that I make a statement, which is every kind of release aid can be shot badly. The young lady in the video is a university level athlete. She is using a back tension release aid, and when I push play on that video, you should be able to see that her fingers quickly move before the release fires. This is punching her release aid. It shows you that a back tension release aid can also be shot in a command fashion. So there's typically two types of ways to activate your release. One would be in the surprise fashion, and the other is in a command fashion. For me, either can be effective in terms of archers have used them to very great results around the world. My preference would obviously be the surprise style. Now, there are many ways to actually activate your release aids. And If you talk to many archers around the world, they will explain to you their way. In terms of the ways to make this release fire, there are multiple methods. So there's the relax index finger method, there's the relax all fingers method, there's the increased tension in the ring or pinky fingers, there's the increased tension on all fingers method, there's the pull against the cam, there's the push-pull of a resistance release aid, and there's also ones where you'll see archers trying to lean their body to make this fire as well. All of them can be effective. My main purpose of this slide is to say that there's typically two styles of ways that you want to activate, or you can activate a release aid, and there's multiple methods in which you can also move your body to make these activation styles. So moving on to slide number 28, what you can see here is how do we then teach someone to have a surprise release? There's two images on the bottom right portion of this slide from the World Archery Coaching course. These are two great methods to teach your athletes how to create a surprise release. So one is that you as the coach can actually make this release fire so they're surprised when it goes off. And the second is using one of your digits underneath their release so that you can feel how they're making that work. They can also then do that to other archers who are doing it correctly in terms of a surprise release, but there's also other methods as well. My favorite method would be using a resistance release aid to get the feeling or the sensation of what a surprise release should be. Now, resistance release aids are typically based on a push-pull or a pull method. They don't require any sort of rotation or any sort of pushing of a button. They just have to be pulled to a certain pressure before they fire. I try to set it relatively heavy, and this can create a good feeling, at least, of what a release should feel like. I would then couple that with the World Archery methods of actually firing the release for them and then feeling how they actually activate that release. Now, I also like the back tension release aids or rotational release aids. These release aids are my favorite for beginner archers and can be taught very, very effectively. For me, setting it colder or slower is a great way to introduce or have the archer more comfortable with the movement of their hand and elbow and body to make it fire. I also don't like to use the click in that instance, teaching the more developmental athletes. Now, I also make a point here, which is, as a coach of a wide variety of archers, I also suggest the owning of a wide variety of release aids. Everyone's hands are different shapes and sizes, and also their style of activation can be very different as well. So obviously you can see my little collection here. I'm very partial to that brand of release aid, but there are multiple brands and manufacturers of high quality release aids that make a range of types. So please try and grab yourself some various release aids, a back tension, a thumb button, a resistance perhaps, a safety version as well. It can be very effective to teaching your athletes how to activate a surprise release more often.